I live up north, and every year we get a decent amount of snow. Last year in December, we got our first big snow of the season. In fact, it was the first snowing that was projected to stick on the ground, and it was supposed to be a pretty big blizzard. Almost a foot of snow was expected overnight. I knew this meant I would have to spend the following morning shoveling. The snow started to fall at about 5 p.m. and continued through the night. Thankfully, it was a Friday, and I would not have to go anywhere for the next 2 days. The night went on, and the snow got heavier and heavier. When I could see there was already a lot of snow on the ground, I went up to the attic of my house where I kept my shovel. I got to the upstairs hallway and opened the attic door. As soon as I did, I thought I heard a noise come from inside the attic. It was a little bit alarming, but we did have a mouse or two up there in past years. So I walked up the stairs one at a time to go into the dark attic. I didn't hear any other noise other than the loud creaking of the stairs that I was walking on. When I reached the top, it was pretty dark, and I had boxes everywhere. I looked around for my shovel and saw it up against the corner wall. When I got a few steps away from it, I nearly fell over when I heard the sounds of a loud scream. It was coming from just a few feet away from me and sounded completely insane. Then, as I looked around, I saw a dirty-looking woman come charging at me from behind one of the boxes. I ran quickly back for the stairs, but the woman was able to knock me over as she ran into me. Then she hit me once before I was able to get up and run for the stairs again. This time, I just about jumped all the way down the staircase and slammed the door shut behind me with the woman almost making it out. I held the door shut as hard as I could and reached for my phone to call the police. She was very strong though, and I could feel her throwing herself against the door on the other side. I was barely able to dial 911, and then I decided I would make another run for it. With the operator on the line, I quickly left the door and sprinted down my stairs outside into the freezing cold and down my driveway. Finally, when I had ran to a house across the street, I explained what was going on. Not long after, I saw the woman stick her head out of the front door and then go back inside. I waited in my neighbor's driveway until the police came and got the crazy woman. I still don't know how she made it into my attic or how long she was up there. This story I'm about to tell you was in fact the scariest moment of my life. It all took place roughly 5 years ago. I was traveling around the country and was near the mountains, so I decided to go on a hike with my friend that lived in the area named Steve. Steve was letting me stay at his place for a few days, and he was always telling me how great the mountains were. We went a little farther than he normally did and started hiking on a path nearby. It was pretty great, but as the day went on, it started to snow. None of us had really paid much attention to weather forecasts, but we were dressed for the cold, so it didn't bother us. We kept going, and as we did, the snow became more and more dense. Finally, when the sun started to set, we decided to head back. By this time, the snow had gotten so heavy that it covered much of the path, and it was really hard to tell where we were. We were also so far out that we weren't receiving service on our cell phones. We walked for a while back and quickly realized that we were lost. This was a scary situation with the snow getting deeper and deeper each minute, and nobody else out here at all. We walked in the direction we thought was right for what felt like a long time. Then we came upon fresh tracks in the snow. There were boot prints walking across the direction where we were going of what looked like a person. We decided to follow them and see where they led. But they started going deeper and deeper into the woods. Everything was darkness and snow, but we kept walking, following the footprints, until we heard a noise. We couldn't tell where it came from, though. We walked a little ways farther, and then saw who was making the footprints. There was a man standing next to a tree, about 20 feet away. However, he did not have a shirt on, and had very long blonde hair. But the scariest part is that he had a bow and arrow in his hand. When he saw us, Steve said hello, but the man didn't answer. He just looked at us with an angry look on his face. He seemed unaffected by the cold or the snow. At that point, I turned around and started to walk away. I said to Steve we should leave. He agreed, and as we did, we heard the noise of the bow and arrow being shot. It hit a tree less than 5 feet away from us. We started to move faster then, but the man did not run after us. We went back the way we came and walked in the dark, not knowing where we were for a long time. We would look over our shoulders every so often, but it was so dark that we really couldn't see much of anything. Finally, after what felt like forever, we saw some familiar areas and luckily made it back to our car somehow. When we did, Steve turned around and seemed to notice something. Then he ran to the car and we both got inside. I asked him what he had seen, and he told me he saw a third set of tracks in the snow that had been trailing ours on the path all the way to where our car was. We quickly left and did not return to that location. This story occurred roughly 15 years ago. At the time, I was a young 19-year-old female college student. I live up in the Northeast, and I was driving home from work. I worked at a grocery store about 5 to 10 miles from my house, and on this particular night, while I was at work, it started to snow a lot. I hadn't really been keeping up with the weather reports or the news, and when I got off work at around 11 o'clock at night, I was surprised to see almost a foot of snow on the ground. My car was covered in snow, but luckily I kept a snow scraper in my trunk, and I began scraping it off. It took me a good 5 to 10 minutes to get it all done, and then I got in my car and began to drive home. I had a small little car, and right away I had a hard time moving because of all the snow. I could tell it was going to be a difficult drive. I had to pass through some relatively quiet roads to get home, and I feared that they would be covered in snow to the point where I wouldn't make it. The drive home normally took me around 10 minutes. On this night, it took me over 15 minutes just to get halfway home. There weren't many other cars on the road at all, with the combination of the snowstorm and it being late at night. Despite that, I was still having a hard time driving and nearly got stuck several times. My car seemed to be sliding all around the roads as I drove home. I made a turn onto one road, and as I did, my car slid and ended up sliding off the road and slightly into the ditch. It wasn't a very deep ditch, and in no snow I would be able to drive back out of it, but in these conditions I had no chance. I tried for a while, but I was getting nowhere at all. Meanwhile, the snow kept coming down outside and making things worse. It was a pretty quiet road that I was on, and I didn't see any other cars on it at all. I got out my phone to call my parents, but I quickly realized that it was dead. At that point, I didn't know what I was going to do. Maybe my parents would see that I hadn't returned for a while and go out looking for me. I could try to walk home, but I knew it would take me well over an hour and I would likely freeze. I sat there for about 10 minutes or so thinking of what to do. Then I saw a truck pull onto the road. It looked like a pretty powerful truck and didn't seem to have much of a problem driving down the street. When it approached near me, I saw it slow down and then stop shortly in front of me. A man then got out and walked to my car. I rolled down my window and he asked me if I needed help. I told him what had happened and he offered to give me a ride. I was more than happy to get out of the situation I was in, and I just wanted to get home, so I accepted his offer and walked with him to his truck. The man looked to be in his 30s and was on the larger side. He wore a winter coat and a hat with gloves. I got into the passenger side door and he got into the driver's seat and then started driving. He briefly asked me how my car got in the ditch and I explained it to him. Then he said to me that I looked really good in the creepiest way possible. I told him thanks and then the conversation went quiet. It was at that point that I realized that the man had never asked me where my house was or where I needed him to drive me. Instead, he had just started driving, and he seemed to know where he was going. I was getting more and more uncomfortable each minute, and finally I asked the man where we were going. About 5 seconds passed before he answered me, and when he did, he just said, "You'll see." I knew I needed to get out of the car, but I could see that my passenger's door was locked. Meanwhile, I could see that we were driving farther and farther away from my house. The man made several other creepy comments the farther we drove. It got to the point that I was so uncomfortable, I wanted to do anything to get out of there. I decided to ask the man to turn the radio on, and he did. At that point, I saw a stop sign coming up, and as soon as we started slowing down, I rolled down my passenger's window all the way, and I jumped out. I'm pretty small, but it was still a tight fit. As I was about halfway out the window, I felt the man's hand on my leg as he tried to grab me, but I was just able to make it out. I then heard his door open, and I figured he was going to chase after me, so I ran off the road and into the woods. I ran as fast as I could, despite it being so cold and snowy out, but I didn't feel much from all the excitement. Finally, when I was sure I wasn't being chased anymore, I stood there for a while catching my breath. Then I slowly made my way back to the road. It took me a good 10 minutes to find my way back, and by the time I saw the road, I was freezing and could barely feel my fingers. I ended up standing in the middle of the road and literally flagging down the next car, taking my chances with them. Thankfully, it turned out to be a nice lady, and she gave me a ride home. I told her all about what happened to me on the way. I made it back safely, but unfortunately, I was unable to remember any of the license plates from the man's truck. But I'm just glad that I'm safe.